Welcome to Conscious I, living in authentic connection and harmony with self, others, and the world, featuring Ravi and Savitri. Hi, Ravi.
Hello, Savitri. How are you?
I am fine, and I just finished a piece of cake.
And
I'm gonna
I saw
say,
you take that last bite. It looked amazing.
I'm just gonna say, to introduce this episode with a piece of cake may not be congruent with where we're headed in our dialogue, but I have to tell you, sometimes you just need to eat cake.
Sometimes you do get to eat your cake and have it too.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just saying the importance. I never hold back. One of my favorite items to get is the 7 Up cake at Aldi. And I'll have a slice of cake with my coffee every morning if that's what I feel like doing. Because looking at the self sensory system, at least for how I've come to understand it for myself, is by tuning in and giving my self sensory system what brings pleasure and enjoyment is just as important as activating discipline. Um, Keeping my system in a regulated state um, is just as important as it's part of the practice.
It is.
Now,
Mhm.
of course, we're talking about, of course, involved in that conversation is moderation and, truly listening so that we're tuned into our bodies so we know when something goes from being pleasurable to being harmful.
Mhm. Mhm.
But absolutely, pleasure is a big part of my practice.
Well, yes, and as we started talking about just prior to this the recording starting, the um, the whole idea that we talk a lot about practices. We definitely have that as part of our healthful hygiene, and a lot of times maybe some of you are thinking, well, surely they don't eat cake. But let me just say, cake is my mental health treatment. It's my therapy. And yes, a lot of times that gets out of control for some people, and we have well known documentation about eating disorders and some of the other things that occur. But the point you made about moderation and being able to tune in to our bodies, what helps us feel pleasure and helps us feel balanced. And there are a lot of things that fall into those categories. So it's not an austere lifestyle by any means to have a solid spiritual practice.
You talked about balance.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, today's conversation on what does it mean to be whole,
Hmm.
or healing versus wholeness. Um, I think we hear about healing, being healed. You have to heal yourself to move forward. And there's all this kerfuffle around what it means to heal. And certainly, like we talked about last week, there are plenty of traumas and samskaras to heal that we came into this life with, and some that we're experiencing now. So how do we fix that without having to fix it?
Yeah, great question. And I know when we decided to talk about this and put it on our topic list, there were some things that that prompted me to go, let's do this. We get inundated with social media. Okay, that's not new. Um, but involved in social media are perspectives that repeat over and over again. Well, we all know that something comes our way 13 times or so, and then we start to pay attention to it, feel comfortable with it, or in some cases, if it happens, believe in it. And so marketing uses that technique in a very effective way. So does politics. So, given that, and we'll go over here now, the buzzwords or the words of fashion that come and go through our uh, cultural lifespan, multicultural lifespan, microcultural lifespan. We all have language and words that have different meanings. And if you think about the word healing from a medical perspective, we know what that is. They're looking at the body, right? Let's do something to the body because the body's not doing something that's supposed to be doing at this time. Then we have healing from a mental health perspective, and we say, okay, this person is feeling or behaving a certain way, and it's not exactly beneficial to them right now. So let's see what we can do with that. And then we have a thing around spiritual healing, and that seems to be the rage these days. Uh, I did a quick study, just a qualitative ethnographic type of study over 2 weeks. And I brought myself into a similar scrolling pattern on the same social media platforms for the same amount of time so that I could see what are the predominant words and cultural things going on. Now, this happened before we had some of the things that we talked about in our last episode. So it falls into two categories: positivity and healing. And the number of times that healing, the word healing, was mentioned in a spiritual way, how to heal, here's how you heal. Healing happens when, all those things, we see those come by. 179 times in 2 weeks. Somewhere, somebody was talking about healing. Then, I'm going to make sure I have my notes in front of me so that I'm giving you the correct data. Looking at positivity, that was a little more subjective from my standpoint because not everybody comes out with something and makes a statement that says, to be positive, do this. So I looked at more things that were having to do with uplifting your life, you know, being joyful, being satisfied. And a lot of times they dovetailed with the healing word too. So the positivity thing is sort of tapering off. So we only had 102 of those positivity statements. And I may have missed some because I was using a more subjective way of looking for those. And they were basically quotes about, you know, how to be positive in your life. And positivity heals. So there was an interesting dynamic there with those two ways of thinking. And then I started thinking about, and I'll tell you, a couple things started coming across social media, is that we're just enough. And I remember about 6 or 8 years ago, being just enough was the buzzword. You are just enough. You are enough. And it was a whole concept about being enough. And I thought, well, where did that go? Because now, what you mentioned, we're about fixing ourselves. We're about fixing our attitudes to be positive. We're about fixing our spiritual or physical or mental health so that we're healing. So we've gone from being just enough to being broken. Because if we have to heal something, it means that something is broken. Something is wrong, something's amiss, and we've fallen back into, rather than an acceptance of who we are and living a dharmic life because of that, to making judgments about all kinds of things that go on. Our internal dialogue, our external dialogue, a way we do this, the way we do that. And we're judging, self-judging, and others are judging. So we've moved into that perspective. Well, that wasn't a very positive statement you made, or that was a negative thought that you had. So all of a sudden, the fix-it mode kicks in. So thanks for bringing up the fix-it mode, because I think that's the foundation of where I was going with this. So what happens if we've already decided we need healing? Now, how do we do that? And that's what is coming up for people, is that there isn't an answer. And when they don't have an answer, then they fall into a state of thinking they failed, they're not good enough, they never will be. And all of you can fill in the blanks, because I think every human on the planet at some point has experienced some of that. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting you said, what is the answer, to that question that we all have. How do I fix this in me? How do I get rid of this habit? How do I welcome in, doing something differently? And I think we can look at that on a personal level, but we can also see this, what I've seen arise in social media as well, and the healing of us as a collective. Mm-hmm. So, and when we look at, I think I kind of took this in my review and research for today's conversation. I was looking at the current administration's rise into fascism. Okay, so I found it interesting because I thought it went really well together, because you look at, let me start by saying healing is unification. It's integration of all the parts of ourselves that make us who we are. So the parts that we think we need fixing, the parts that we don't like, those parts, if we try to keep them out of our self-sensory system, they're going to just keep trying to make their way back in. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, and I think I maybe noted those. I'll have to mention them later, but welcoming those parts of ourselves that we'd rather not see and give them a seat at the table. And instead of, the "what are you doing here? Get out of here" response, imagining those parts of ourselves as a little child and saying, "Hey, I see you over there. What do you need? Come sit down. Let's talk." Mm-hmm. And I think for me, as I was thinking about this, I'm like, okay, I can entertain that thought for myself. And when those parts of myself come up that I don't really like, I can do that. And then the world shows itself to me, and I get all in a rage about a federal agent murdering a citizen, so documented or not. Those types of things, and then all of those things about welcoming those parts of myself that I'd rather not see goes out the window, and I turn into rage machine. But I think, in our last conversation, we talked about the cycles that are influencing us as a collective now, And the tactics that are being used are, emotional manipulation, us versus them mentality, false promises, the disregarding of facts, and, challenging the rules and laws that govern and guide us, and creating division through that. So it really paralleled what that conversation I was having with myself on personal healing. We're experiencing this on a collective level in ways that we haven't experienced in 60 or so years, I
Right.
think, at a
Oh, yeah.
level of intensity that we
Hmm.
haven't seen. I know we talked about the 84-year cycle of Uranus and some things that are coming up from that transit. Same thing with Neptune and the 165-year cycle. Something we'll talk about more in the next coming weeks is the 60-year cycle of the Chinese zodiac. That is also, we can look at that for some perspective. But my point being, what I find interesting is we're at this crux in where we are at this place and point in time where we really have some serious work to bring that sense of wholeness back to the community, to the collective, on a community and collective level. So this conversation, it's great to talk about, we have all those things and all those solutions out there to heal yourself, but we also can look at that on the broader scale and the bigger picture, and again, not thinking of what needs to be fixed, but what needs to be integrated.
Exactly. Embrace it. And I think the episodes that you were referencing are the ones that we did on shadow work and ego, and maybe even some on dharma, where we had acceptance and integration and assimilation, to be able to do that. We are who we are. And part of that is what we bring to this lifetime in order to resolve or experience a soul being in a body. But at the same time, we have karma that we brought with us. And so often the karma is bubbling to the surface and will continue to show itself in different capacities, different events, different relationships, whether it be in relationship with ourselves or relationships with others, until we balance that debt and that the energy becomes quiet, tranquil, and peaceful. And then the karma is resolved. So the collective karma and the resolution of that karma is going to be very challenging right now to bring unity to all of us on the planet. At one point, and maybe it was stuffed down or somewhere in a covert way, still vibrating like the undertow. But on the surface, and we go back to another sociological phrase that has kind of fallen away, and that's politically correct behaviors and language, which has morphed from the concept of good manners, respect, uh, coming back to decorum in the way that we uh, see ourselves in forgiveness or integration, and we see others. The sense of decorum is what has dissolved, in my opinion, in our collective. So now, rather than saying, okay, we agree to disagree, but we're still going to move on in a peaceful way, a non aggressive confrontational way will move together in the adage of live, let live, which has gone out of fashion. I'm not sure, maybe even some people know what that means. And the healing then that we talk about from a collective standpoint may begin. We have to do the things that are on the surface, the day-to-day integration with others and with ourselves, in order to be able to step onto that path. It's like the first stepping stone. If we get on that first stepping stone and we're confrontational, aggressive, and don't accept ourselves, that shadow, or others in the way that they choose to live their lives, we know that that's impinging on freedoms at the ground level. But at the same time, it begins to become even more divisive. And it's like a virus.
What's interesting is that when you have an administration that is all about the ego and all about, in order to elevate that ego, creating divisiveness amongst others, other groups of people. And we see a very clear division, right? In this country, you can look at it as right versus left. And I see the extremes of both sides. And on the extreme of both sides, the actions are similar, right? One side accusing the other of exactly the same thing. However, when we look at what is beneath all of that, we're talking about either practicing. Well, I went to the Yamas and Niyamas. Okay, so we're either honoring and practicing those, and we're angry, righteously angry, for, I don't want to say right reasons, but for the right reasons. We want to protect others. We want all people to thrive. We want all people to be safe. We want all people to be able to live out their lives in whatever way they see fit, as long as it's not harming others, and ideally as long as it's not harming themselves. So
Ahimsa, yeah.
Exactly. And then you have another side coming at it from the angle of, no, we have to stop these behaviors and stop these actions and stop this and stop that. So I think, that's my perspective. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. So how do we unify and bring into wholeness or integrate those two very opposite perspectives on life? And I think we had been doing that, like you said, through decorum, which was termed to be a negative thing as political correctness. But it has, now that is being dissipated, it's like I see it, the way I think of it is it's almost, rather than being something that we can grab onto for support and say, I don't like what you're saying, but you know what, you hold that belief, as long as you don't act on it and harm others, you just go right ahead and feel that way. And we're losing the ability to hang on to that for support, because it's being dissolved by, it's a sense of, not power, but a sense of power that we do have the right to tell others how to live, or we do have the right to cause harm to others because we disagree with something, the way they are living their life, or who they are, where they come from. And so it's all, that's just how it's coming to me now. It's almost like those very solid things that we were hanging on to for support, they're reorganizing. Because as much as that helped us, it clearly wasn't the answer or the solution.
Right.
It goes deeper than those surface levels. So, how this comes back to, healing and wholeness is when it's those parts. If you cannot come to a place of reconciliation of those parts of yourself that you're not comfortable with, that you don't want to see, you project those out into the world, and you cause the pain that you're feeling inside. And that we're seeing on an astronomical level. And as much as difficult as it is to wrap my mind around, I have to come back to the idea that healing is unification and integration. And I think that what divides us now so deeply, ultimately, when the pendulum swings far enough, is what will be unites us.
Yeah, so we almost have touched the edge of a paradox in this, and that is that you were mentioning that sense of power, maybe, that is coming out. But I would use the word maybe of entitlement. I'm entitled to feel this way, so I'm entitled to act on it. And that foundation of entitlement, if we start digging down in, is grounded on a sense of freedom. And when we start talking about freedom, the edges are really, really fragile, in that they crack and drop away. When even our dialogue about integration and ahimsa, we have a perspective. Everyone has a perspective. My perspective of ahimsa, do no harm, might be completely different than someone else's. And I would use our diets as one of those. I mean, thinking about cake, but we'll go into those that eat meat and those that don't. And we look at that. And so there are varying degrees of veganism or vegetarianism to veganism, and there are varying degrees of carnivores. Well, I don't eat meat, but I eat fish. Or I don't eat fish, I eat eggs. So where are those lines? And to just think about how that comes into play in our culture is not as harmful maybe to each other, where the level of harm exists outside of us. I think what you were pointing at was, and I was bringing forward with decorum, is that yes, it's fragile, a sense of integration, knowing that we ultimately would agree to disagree in a respectful way without acting on a harmful action of some type. At the same time, to come to a collective, somewhere along the lines, we have agreed on certain rules and boundaries for the good of all, the greater good. Another one of those phrases. And I would just use the concept of the traffic light. You know, we've agreed that we'll all stop when it's red. Not everybody does it because not everybody agrees, and so there's a consequence sometimes. Um, and that we will all go into action at a green light. That is a process regulation for safety, for the good of all. When we start digging into what freedoms are and the personal freedoms and the belief systems, the attitudes, and we get into the guts of who someone is and how they have been raised, some would say programmed, um, there's a lot of stuff to deal with there. Because when we agree to disagree, if we start creating rules around the disagreements, then where is that line, that bleeding edge of freedom, that self sovereignty?
That's a great question, and it makes me chuckle a little bit. I can't stop thinking about The Princess Bride and the guy who's always saying inconceivable until Wesley finally says, or it wasn't Wesley, it was maybe Inigo who said, "I do not think that word means what it thinks you mean." And that's exactly how I feel about freedom and the way freedom is thrown around. Freedom and sovereignty are completely, in my mind, different things, or at least they're probably, I guess maybe I'm thinking they're the same, but how the perspectives of being free versus being sovereign are miles apart.
But I think we dig into it when we start thinking about what kinds of freedoms would I have versus what someone in another location or even next door would have. We have all these boundaries where we come in contact with others in so many different ways, and we agree to a certain decorum or certain set of rules. Some are written, some aren't, that we understand help us just get along. I mean, we can still be sovereign within. So where are you headed with the sovereign
It
versus
just
freedom?
This makes me think of a neighbor that I had, and I adore this woman as a person. She's a unique, vibrant individual, and like all of us, we all have our own flaws, right? So we would go walking together, and on our walks, I started noticing patterns, okay, through our conversations. I live in a condo. She lived in a similar one with the upstairs, downstairs, and the downstairs neighbors were doing some renovations, and she took it as it was just almost a personal attack, because it was always at this time and it was the worst time for her, and it was always just, don't they know what I'm doing? And she was big on retribution, and it did give me a laugh, but this just would never cross my mind to put a bucket upside down on the floor and bang on it with the broom.
Right, right.
And so when we think about, I notice patterns, pattern recognition. I notice this in people who want a lot of personal freedom, a lot of, these people who are big on personal freedom, I don't really think often have a grasp of what sovereignty is, because that personal freedom is tied to what they believe everyone else should do around them, and to mold and shape their lives around them and what works for them. Whereas that's sovereignty, right? You get to be sovereign. You get to choose, where you live, and even though you may not feel like it, you may be denying yourself the right to choose, but you have the right to live your life as a sovereign being, a soul experiencing itself in a physical form. Now, our personal freedoms extend as far as the next person. However, I find it interesting that the folks who I notice, or at least in the patterns I've come to recognize, they want, there's a desire for the world outside to shape itself to you. Whereas, and your focus is very often on exactly what you don't want to see. So what happens? It's where your focus is, where intention goes, energy flows, and it keeps coming back into your life again and again. And it's like, there is a common denominator. At some point, you kind of got to recognize that.
It's the mirror effect, yes.
Right, exactly. So maybe I got off topic there, but I think that it cracks me up a little bit, because that keeps coming back to me. I do not think this word thinks what it means, what you think it means. And so that's why we have these landmarks, right? So we're journeying through this life together, and we may not know how to react or respond in a certain situation. And so the yamas and niyamas are a way for us to, they're guideposts, they're landmarks for us to go, hey, maybe I should move away from retribution and harm to others, and move towards kindness and compassion and understanding. Do not steal. And do not steal doesn't just mean physical things. It means don't steal somebody else's joy. Don't steal their emotional energy. Don't steal their time. And instead, cultivate new skills and abilities that bring joy and fulfillment to you. Mm-hmm. And I look at what's going on in the collective, and so much could be made whole if people just found santosha, contentment in their own life. Fall in love with your own life, and you won't worry if this person uses he, they pronouns, or she, her, or they, them, or he, her, or whatever. You be, feeling as if someone living their life freely, feeling as if they're living their life freely is stifling to you, is an indication that you're not able to live as a sovereign being. And that is the crux of the issue.
Yes, yes. It's interesting you brought that up, because, I don't offer a lot of personal stories when we talk, but there is a little one that just comes to mind. And that is, at one point in my life where I was, I had people that were around me doing things, some work, some friends, some just acquaintances, who seemed to, I'll just tell you what I was experiencing, and then maybe where I came to a result, a thought, but seemed to talk a lot about their experience with Christianity, their experience with Jesus, and their experience with the community that they were in with their church, and how their children were doing with the religion. And it always felt like in the beginning, just sharing. And over time, there started to become invitations. Well, why don't you come to church with us? Or wouldn't you like to maybe have your children come over and experience some of the things that my children experience with our community? And I realized that I think I was a target for a missionary program. And and what's interesting is that, that actually, now, that may be just self-aggrandizement, like, oh, they want me in there, right? But, over time, it happened, happened several times within the same religious community with different people. It was like, okay, well, that family didn't work. Let's try this one. And, this went on like for 5 or 6 years. And when I look back on that, I can't help but think that conversion was their intention. I was probably considered to be a lost soul, and they cared about me and wanted to, help me. So I look at it that way. At the same time, I could take the other perspective and say, wow, they are really infringing on my ability to be free. You know, they are trying to just put a box around me and make me just like them so that they feel good about it. Uh, so I don't know which way it went, and this could just be a figment of my imagination, but I wanted to share that because it felt relevant in the way that often we come to things with the idea of being helpful, compassionate, loving, and our perspective is just not aligned with where we're sending our compassion and our love. Um, doesn't mean that you can't still have a relationship with those people or whatever, but the intention around the relationship may not be a great fit for the receiver uh, for whatever reasons. So I saw you laugh about that, but
It is. Although I have to, I chuckle and I laugh out loud because it's such a ubiquitous experience, I think, for anyone in the States and beyond to be trying, let us recruit you, come to church with us and do
yes.
this and go on this mission trip. Let's save the world. And I'm like, bruh, the world does not need saving. But I have to laugh a little at myself too, because don't we all, when we have a spiritual awakening, want everybody to experience it and to know that feeling? And, I can think back to what that was for me was the practice of Kundalini Yoga, which, opened up the opportunity for a Kundalini awakening, energy awakening. And was I the most annoying person in the world, telling everybody about Kundalini Yoga? Absolutely. I'm sure I was, because to me it's like, it's the answer. Everybody should be doing Kundalini Yoga. And do I still believe that? Yeah, kind of. I feel like the world would benefit. But I certainly I think, and I hope, I have tempered my approach. I understand that there are as many avenues and ways as there are human beings on the planet. So, but it's interesting and a little funny because as I interact with people who are new on their spiritual path or new on their journey. Of course, they're out there sharing and telling everyone about it, and everybody should do this, and everybody should get sober, and everybody should, join an intentional community, and everybody should do this practice, and everybody should eat this food, and everybody should take this herb. And it's absolutely fantastic to share your experience and to be excited about it. but we, again, there's that pendulum swing of that's what that is for you. That's what worked for you. And by being, you don't have to recruit anybody to do anything. When you're truly awakened and truly in that experience and truly radiant with your own spiritual awakening, your light will attract others
Yeah.
in. And those people who are attracted to what did work for you will take the parts that work for them and leave the rest. And that's, to me, how to live the spiritual life, to be radiant, to be the lighthouse, isn't to, the lighthouse doesn't leave the shore. It doesn't go out shining its light in everybody's eyes. It stands firm on its shore and is a beacon of light so that those who come near it can see it. And you can choose to, embrace the light or not. So I think, the Yamas and Niyamas are the most effective guides that we have to bring that sense of wholeness to self without infringing on the wholeness of others.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Of course, as you were talking about this, I was thinking, and going back to our socio-political environment that we've been touching on here and there the last couple of episodes, I have to take a deep breath before I say this, but I will say it. And those that are of at the other end of the continuum, wherever that may be, depending on where you are, you were defining left and right, and that's how it's often done, or blue states and red states if we're in the United States. So if you think about it that way, I have to bring myself to say, with a deep breath, that those that are diametrically opposed to my philosophies, my ways of thinking about how the world would be a better place, they have that very same sense of soul-driven belief and philosophy. And it's difficult to make that common connection. And I think that's where you were headed earlier in our conversation about at both ends of the continuum, there's a lot of similar underpinnings of beliefs, attitudes, and actions.
Yes.
And so hopefully, as we consider who we are, each as our own individual, we can align ourselves with the understanding that seeing that in others, regardless of belief, attitude, and behaviors, is that global perspective of ahimsa. So, are things out of bounds? Sure, I'll be the first one to say there are things out of bounds. And those at each end of the continuum will point to things and say, that's out of bounds. So we choose where our boundaries are and what's out of bounds, and then we live our lives accordingly as we can, as long as the influence isn't so great that we have to cave in.
It is such a pickle. It is so hard to wrap my mind around that as well. But you're absolutely right in that I think there have been some beginnings of studies being done on this. The perception of oneself as being a good person versus what their idea of being, the impact of being a good person has on others around them. And if we look at, and I am going to be pretty clear here, there are clear ties to brain activity, whether you're right or left brain, to the political spectrum as well.
Yes.
And so those on the right are more in their left brain, which is more compartmentalized, more dogmatic, and those on the left are more in their right brain, which is more free-flowing and creative and open. And so when you said that, we're coming from the same perspective, just in completely different ways. It reminds me of my sister once told me that. She's like, you and mom are the same person, just on completely different ends of the spectrum. And I maybe have said that before, and I was like, oh, damn it, she's right. My mom being very tied to her religious beliefs, and me being very adamant about my spiritual beliefs and what those mean, and how that those are the rules and laws that we live by. But my question to anyone who is listening, or anybody out there, is what impact is that having on those around you? Is it limiting others, or is it allowing them to flourish in the way that feels good to them? Mm-hmm. And I find so much of that, I'm doing this because I want the world to be a good place, and I want it to be a safe place. Is that according to what that looks like to you? Or is that according to how that feels to others? Mm-hmm. And when you're so focused on having the world conform to suit you so you can, quote unquote, be free, I think we can see the irony there. Right, but right. Mm-hmm. It's a very there's a lot more there. There are many more of the guideposts, the Yamas and Niyamas, that I feel play into that. Brahmacharya, moving from greed and covetousness to appreciation and pleasure without excess. Mm-hmm. Again, a common complaint. We look at what's dividing us right now. Oh, those people are the reason that my life is so bad. Those people are stealing our resources. When we look at Satya. How many, if we look at our leadership, are they speaking in truthfulness, or are they speaking in lies and half-truths? And what are you listening to, and what are you choosing to believe? Are you choosing to believe the things that divide us, or choosing to believe the things that unite us? And when you stop and look, it's like, take a step back and look at your life, and are you able to step away from that greedy mindset of lack to just appreciation for what you have, and that in doing so you can wish the same for others? I digress, but I think that we all could move a little closer to these guideposts in this time to bring about a sense of wholeness and integration. These aren't just, for example, the Yamas, they're not just don't do this. They're move from this to this. So ahimsa isn't just do no harm. It's move away from harming ourselves and others to showing compassion and kindness to ourselves and others. Satya isn't just don't lie. It's moving away from lies and half-truths into being who you are authentically, expressing yourself truthfully and authentically. It's not just don't steal. It's, stop sucking the life force out of everybody and everything and start moving towards cultivating things that bring you joy and happiness. Same thing with brahmacharya. It's not just about don't covet, it's about appreciate. And finally, since we're here, a parigraha, it's not just about moving away from attachment and ownership and entanglement, but to being able to have a sense of intimacy and connection without possession.
Detachment, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, that's a lot to to embody. And I think that's why, we don't do it all at once. It's these are the guideposts that we meet along the way on our journey, and we have the opportunity to either move towards them or away from them. Mm-hmm. And we can either be guided to a sense of wholeness in all of our messiness and imperfection, or into a sense of brokenness, which just continues to divide. And I am still really struggling to wrap my mind around the fact that those who are doing very harmful things may have good in their heart. That I'm a work in progress on that.
Everyone is. That's why we're talking about it. And, there is no single simple answer. And you may have what you just said, good in the heart of recognizing it in others about certain things, and other things not so much. We
Right.
have boundaries, and I think that comes from our own internal authenticity and truth about what does something like ahimsa mean when I activate it in my life, and recognize that may be completely different than someone else's. These are all like words. These are the words. Are we able to hold that steady all the time in our lives? We're humans, we do things, and things come and go, right? We get pulled in by the undertow. Yeah.
Well, and we have the actions that can prepare us. Also saucha, keep our bodies and minds and spirits pure through practice and stay free and clear from Maya. Santosha, contentment. But beyond that, really, like when you're falling in love with your own life, you really don't have the time to be out there harping on what other people are doing.
That's right.
So just get out there and find something, to fall in love with in your own life. If that was the one aspect that somebody chose to focus on, how that could change the world. But we've talked about choosing discipline and growth. Mm-hmm. And there's svadhyaya, knowing the self. But I wanted to get to Ishvara Pranidhana. Pay attention to what life is asking of you. Like, you said this, I think, in maybe one of our first episodes. Stay in your lane.
Oh, right.
Not everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. You don't have to go out there policing the world and what everybody else is doing. You've got enough to work on in your own self-study and tuning into and understanding what life has for you to do. And I think if we could all let me just write this down. Now here I am. If we could all be more like me, ... See, and there you go, a full circle, and here I am.
Right.
Back
And
to
all of a sudden, freedom becomes a paradox. Yes.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, but I think that it's a good rule of thumb to take a look inward and ask, am I concerned about the sty in my own eye? Or am I, worried about what's going on with others?
Yeah. Well, healing and wholeness. Lots of nuances. So this has been a lot of fun today.
Well, I'm glad that we solved that problem for the world, at least, and now everything's going to be okay.
Hey, I started with cake, so I'm really
yeah. So actually, so do stay tuned for our bonus episode coming out that will put into practice some of what we've been talking about today.
Yes. So we'll dive into more practice, meditation, Kriya with you, and a little bit of somatic work, helping us to identify locations of tension and resistance that are held in our bodies and see if we can at least identify them, maybe do a little bit of remedial work over time as you choose certain things that work for you. So we look forward to that. That'll be fun to do.
An integration session for you to spend a little time in your body, feel what feels right for you, and feel your way forward in the world. So that will be dropping actually tomorrow. We're not even going to make you wait for it.
So please like, share, ring the bell, comment, all those things. You can send us an email if you choose. If you want to learn a little bit more, maybe find out what else you can do or we can do together. It's conscious eyes, EYES 108 @gmail.com.
And thanks for being here today for this very meandering conversation through healing and wholeness. But one that I think, it's important to have because we're all just figuring it out together.
That's right. Yeah. We're all on our dharmic paths, and once in a while we cross. Sometimes we're going side by side, some forward, some behind. We are in all over the map. Our paths are complex and convoluted, but we're here to support each other.
All right, and with that, Sat Nam.
Namaste.